Technically, it's a licensing fee for use of disputed property, Karen corrected. Very reasonable at $200 per month, plus utilities and insurance. Karen. Mike's voice was gentle but firm. I have the deed. I have the survey. I have the original building permits. The pool is mine. Karen's smile didn't waver. Then I suppose we'll see what the courts have to say about that. As she turned to leave, Mike called after her. You know, Karen, we used to be friendly. Remember when you first moved in? I brought you cookies. For a moment, something flickered across Karen's face, a brief shadow of the person she used to be before HOA presidency and property line obsessions had consumed her identity. But the moment passed. That was before I understood my responsibilities to this community, she replied, walking back to her house with the measured steps of someone heading into battle. Behind her closed door, Karen spread the documents across her dining room table and began constructing what she privately called the case. Her husband Brad wouldn't be home from his business trip until Friday, which gave her 3 uninterrupted days to build an airtight legal argument. She had no idea that Mike was, at that very moment, calling his brother-in-law Larry, who happened to be a real estate attorney, to ask a simple question. What do you do when your neighbor has completely lost touch with reality? The answer, as Larry would explain over the phone the next morning, was about to make Karen's life significantly more complicated than she had anticipated. Karen's confidence shattered like her grandmother's china when Mike's attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia Chen, arrived at her door Thursday morning with a manila envelope. Mrs. Whitman, I represent Mike Rodriguez. This is a cease and desist order regarding your harassment of my client. Karen's hands trembled as she read the document. Harassment. I'm protecting my property rights. According to this, Patricia continued, consulting her tablet, you've filed 17 different complaints with city agencies in the past week. You've trespassed on his property to take measurements. You've left threatening notes on his car, and you've called his employer to report suspicious activity. Karen faltered. When listed like that, her perfectly reasonable investigative work sounded almost stalker-ish. Patricia's expression softened slightly. Mrs. Whitman, my client doesn't want to escalate this. He's offering you one chance to step back before this becomes a legal matter. But Karen Whitman had never stepped back from anything in her life. That evening's emergency HOA meeting would be her Waterloo. Fellow board members, Karen began, her voice strained from days of phone calls and research. I've uncovered a conspiracy that goes to the very heart of our community's foundation. Harold looked around the sparsely populated room. Only Dorothy had shown up, and even she seemed uncomfortable. Karen, where is everyone? Janet resigned this morning, Dorothy whispered. Something about not wanting to be accessories to whatever this is becoming. Karen pressed on, unveiling a conspiracy board that looked like something from a Netflix true crime documentary. Red string-connected photos, documents, and what appeared to be a hand-drawn map of underground utility lines. The pool, she announced dramatically, is just the beginning. Mike Rodriguez is systematically undermining our entire subdivision through strategic property manipulation. Harold rubbed his face. Karen, you missed book club last week for the first time in 3 years. Susan asked if you were okay. Susan? Karen spun around, her eyes wild. Susan Morrison from Elm Street. Has she been monitoring my activities? The room fell silent except for the tick of Karen's mantel clock. Dorothy and Harold exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their growing concern for their once rational president. Karen, Dorothy said gently, maybe you should take a little break from all this. Go visit your sister in Portland like you've been planning. I can't leave now, don't you see? Karen's voice cracked. If I abandon my post, everything we've built here crumbles. The property values, the community standards, Karen Whitman stood frozen in her designer athleisure wear, clutching her phone so tightly her manicured nails threatened to crack the screen. Through her kitchen window, she watched in horror as her neighbor Mike Rodriguez attached a garden hose to what she had always considered her pool, the beautiful kidney-shaped oasis that had been the crown jewel of her morning coffee ritual for 3 years. What the hell do you think you're doing? She shrieked, bursting through her sliding glass door like a suburban hurricane. Mike looked up from the pool pump, genuinely confused. Draining my pool for winter maintenance. Same thing I do every October? Karen's face flushed crimson. Your pool. That pool extends 3 feet into my property line. I've been documenting this encroachment for months. She waved her phone, which contained approximately 47 photos of the pool from various angles, each meticulously dated and GPS tagged. The absurdity of the moment wasn't lost on Mike, who had lived in the house for 8 years, 5 years longer than Karen. Ma'am, I have the original property survey. The pool's been here since 1998, and it's entirely on my land. But Karen Whitman, Homeowners Association president and self-appointed guardian of Maple Grove Subdivision's moral fiber, had already speed-dialed 911. Yes, I need police immediately. My neighbor is stealing my property. He's literally draining my pool. As she paced her pristine lawn, Karen's mind raced with the implications. This wasn't just about a pool. This was about respect, authority, and the natural order of suburbia. She had spent 3 years crafting her identity around being the neighborhood's protector, the woman who kept property values high and standards higher. Mike's casual dismissal of her concerns felt like a personal attack on everything she had built. The dispatcher's confused voice crackled through her phone. Ma'am, you're saying someone is draining your pool without your permission? Exactly. This is theft of services, property damage, and probably environmental terrorism. Karen's voice reached a pitch that made nearby birds abandon their perches. Mike stopped what he was doing and walked to the fence line, his expression shifting from confusion to genuine concern. Karen, are you okay? You seem really stressed about this. His kindness only fueled her rage. Karen Whitman didn't need his pity. She needed justice. She had rules to uphold, boundaries to maintain, and a reputation to protect. The pool situation was just the beginning. If she backed down now, who knew what other infractions might slide by unnoticed? 20 minutes later, as 2 bewildered police officers approached the scene, Karen stood ready with a manila folder full of evidence. This was her neighborhood, her domain, and nobody, especially not some contractor who thought he could just drain pools willy-nilly, was going to make her look foolish. The war for Maple Grove had officially begun. Officer Martinez rubbed his temples as Karen thrust a 3-inch thick binder into his hands. This contains photographic evidence, property line measurements, and a complete analysis of water rights violations, she announced with the authority of someone who had clearly watched too many legal dramas. Ma'am, he's draining his own pool, Officer Chen interjected, having already examined Mike's property documents. The survey clearly shows. Survey. That survey is from 1987. Do you know how much ground can shift in 38 years? Karen's eyes gleamed with the fervor of someone who had spent her morning Googling property law loopholes. I demand a new land survey, and soil testing, and a geological assessment. Mike stood in his driveway, still holding the garden hose, watching his neighbor transform into what could only be described as a legal tornado. Karen, seriously, do you want to just come look at the original blueprints? They're in my garage. Don't you Karen me? She snapped, then immediately realized the irony. I am Mrs. Whitman to you, and I am the duly elected president of this HOA. Your casual attitude toward property boundaries is exactly what's wrong with this neighborhood. Officer Martinez closed the binder with a decisive thud. Mrs. Whitman, we can't arrest someone for draining their own pool. If you have genuine concerns about property lines, you'll need to resolve this through civil court. The moment the police cruiser disappeared around the corner, Karen's phone buzzed with a text from her vice president. Dorothy, emergency HOA meeting tonight. Heard police were at your house. Karen's fingers flew across her screen. Calling full board meeting. 7 p.m. sharp. We have a situation. That evening, Karen's living room filled with the 5 other members of Maple Grove's HOA board, though filled was generous, since 3 members had excuses that sounded suspiciously made up. Dorothy arrived with store-bought cookies and barely concealed excitement for drama. Harold, the treasurer, trudged in wearing defeat like a worn cardigan, and Janet, The secretary clutched her notebook with the grim determination of someone documenting evidence for future therapy sessions. "Ladies and Harold," Karen began, standing before her fireplace like a general addressing troops, "we face an unprecedented threat to our community's integrity." Harold raised his hand tentatively. "Karen, didn't the police say?" "The police," Karen interrupted, "are not equipped to handle the complex nuances of HOA governance and property management. That's why we exist." She clicked a remote, and her television displayed a PowerPoint presentation titled "The Pool Crisis." A compre hinsaivi analyze this. Dorothy gasped appreciatively at slide 1, an aerial photo of Mike's backyard, with red arrows pointing to the pool. "As you can see," Karen continued, laser pointer dancing across the screen, "this so-called pool maintenance is clearly a premeditated attempt to undermine our authority. If we allow this precedent, what's next? Unauthorized fence repairs, unlicensed tree trimming." Janet looked up from her frantic note-taking. "But Karen, if it's his pool on his property, that's exactly what he wants us to think." Karen's voice rose with righteous indignation. "I've done extensive research, and there are 17 different municipal codes that could potentially apply to this situation." Harold shifted uncomfortably. 17 seems high. Karen's presentation continued for 43 minutes, complete with charts, graphs, and what appeared to be a psychological profile of Mike based on his lawn maintenance schedule. By the end, Dorothy was the only board member still making eye contact. "I move that we issue an immediate cease and desist order," Karen declared. "Can we do that?" Harold asked weakly. "We can do whatever is necessary to protect our community," Karen replied, her jaws set with determination. "All in favor?" The vote was closer than she'd hoped, but Karen Whitman had her mandate. The pool war was about to enter phase 2. Karen spent the following Tuesday morning in downtown Springfield's records office, armed with caffeine and unwavering determination. By noon, she had requested copies of every document related to her subdivision dating back to 1962, when Maple Grove was still a cornfield owned by a farmer named Eugene Clapperbach. "Excuse me," she cornered the beleaguered clerk, "but this 1987 survey shows a discrepancy of 0.3 inches on lot 247. Shouldn't that invalidate all subsequent property transfers?" The clerk, whose nameplate read Steve Yee in tired Comic Sans font, looked at Karen with the expression of someone whose will to live had been slowly eroded by municipal bureaucracy. "Ma'am, that's not how property law works." "Then explain to me how it does work," Karen demanded, spreading 17 different maps across Steve's desk, like she was planning a military invasion. 3 hours later, Karen emerged from the records office with a cardboard box full of photocopied documents and a theory so complex it required its own filing system. She had discovered that the original 1962 plat showed a proposed community recreation area, roughly where Mike's pool now sat. Never mind that this area was never built, or that subsequent surveys had clearly established individual property lines, or that Mike's deed explicitly included the land in question. Karen Whitman had found her smoking gun. That evening, she knocked on Mike's door with the confidence of someone holding a royal flush. Mike opened it wearing paint-stained clothes and looking exhausted. "Karen, Mrs. Whitman, look, I'm really trying to be patient here, but you called the city inspector, the water department, and apparently someone from environmental services?" "Due diligence," Karen replied crisply, "and I'm here to offer you a reasonable settlement." Mike blinked. "Settlement for what?" Karen handed him a typed document with official-looking letterhead she had designed herself. "I'm prepared to allow you to continue using the pool area in exchange for a modest monthly rental fee and adherence to strict maintenance schedules approved by the HOA board." Mike read the document, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to something approaching admiration for the sheer audacity. "You want me to pay you rent, to use my own pool?" She sank into her armchair, the weight of the past week suddenly crushing down on her. For the first time since this began, Karen Whitman saw herself through others' eyes, A woman who had called the police on a neighbor for maintaining his own property, who had spent her own money on legal research for a case that didn't exist, who had driven away friends and board members in pursuit of a battle that was entirely in her head. "I just wanted to protect what we have here," she whispered. Harold's voice was kind but firm. "Karen, I think it's time you stepped down as HOA president, at least temporarily." Friday morning brought two visitors to Karen's door. The first was her husband Brad, home early from his business trip after receiving concerned calls from neighbors. The second was Mike Rodriguez, holding a small potted plant. "Karen," Mike said simply, "I brought you a peace offering. It's mint, grows anywhere, hard to kill. Thought you might like something for your garden." Karen looked at the plant, then at Mike's genuinely concerned face, then back at her house where boxes of evidence still covered every surface. Something fundamental shifted in her chest, not defeat exactly, but a kind of exhausted clarity. "Mike," she said quietly, "I'd owe you an apology, several apologies actually." "We all get carried away sometimes," Mike replied. "But maybe next time, start with a conversation instead of calling the cavalry." As Karen accepted the mint plant, she couldn't help but notice Mike's pool in the background, properly winterized and covered for the season. It looked perfectly ordinary, just a neighbor's pool in a neighbor's yard, exactly as it had always been. But as she closed her door and looked at the chaos she had created in her own home, Karen Whitman couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't really over. The pool had been resolved, yes, but something deeper had been revealed about herself. Something that would need addressing long after the mint plant found its place in her garden. In her bedroom, tucked away in her nightstand, lay a business card for a therapist her doctor had recommended months ago. Maybe it was time to make that call. Outside, Mike finished securing his pool cover, unaware that Karen was watching from her window, already planning how she might rebuild the bridges she had burned, and wondering if some battles were worth fighting at all.